Good day, everyone. Welcome to Black Logic. Trump says that Zelenskyy could end the Ukraine war almost immediately, hitting a simple solution before high stakes White House talks. Over 500,000 Israeli flood Tel Aviv and other cities, demanding a hostage deal and ceasefire as war fatigue intensifies because at this point, there's been 60,000 people who have perished. U.S. halts medical visas for Gaza 6 children after pressure from far-right activists, drawing sharp criticism from humane rights groups. And GOP-led states deploy National Guard troops to D.C., citing safety concerns despite dropping crime rates, sparking fears of political theater, and everyone chiming in on what they believe the violence in D.C. is and what it was, not looking at every major city in America and how they have more crimes than D.C. Well, there's quite a bit to cover here this morning, but no less. Today, Donald Trump took it a bit further, posting on Truth Social that President Zelenskyy could end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wanted to. Now, this comes just hours before a high-stakes Oval Office meeting with Zelenskyy and leading European figures. And fans of peace deals take note as Trump is pushing hard, but at what cost? Because when we look at this, they're basically stating that if President Zelenskyy is willing to give up Crimea and promise never to join NATO, I want you guys to think about that. Why would President Putin want him not only to give up Crimea, which we're going to cover here a little bit later, folks, but never to join NATO of the Western, not the Eastern European powers? I wonder what strategic sort of strategy that is. Because again, if he simply just gives up Crimea and never join NATO, supposedly they will never have issues with Russia. That is what the reports are stating. So again, we'll see how that unfolds as a lot of the European leaders will be at the White House in DC this week, or even today, rather. There's also some I want to show you guys here very quickly because there's very large protests in Tel Aviv and Israel. Give me 1 second here. I see this continues to try to block my site here. Give me 1 second. But as you see here on the graphic, ladies and gentlemen, that there was over 500,000 people in protest to end this unsenseless genocide of Palestinian people. Now, this site is really messed up, but again, this is in Tel Aviv that you're seeing these pictures here. Okay, a lot of things are occurring. They really don't want to show this, as you can tell, because of the amount of people. A lot of the Jews out here in Israel are definitely against the senseless killing of Palestinians. And as we look at this, it's very heartbreaking that now the same people that the atrocities that occurred against, they're now crying out, stating that this is enough. It's been enough at 40,000 people, at 50,000 people. Now the numbers are at 60,000 people have perished of Palestinian heritage, and maybe only 10 to 15,000 of those people were Hamas. Now, as we look at this, as I stated, in Israel, and again, you have a lot of the Israelites here are very frustrated, and this has boiled over that the streets in a very nationwide protest demanding an end to the Gaza war and a prisoner exchange for hostages. And these are the largest demonstrations since the conflict began. And families and activists warning Netanyahu that the public patience is gone. They're no longer willing to deal in the occupation of Gaza. Because I think when we really talk about this, the Israeli in Israel, they know that by continued occupation and genocide of Palestinians, that this will eventually incite more violence. Again, the American military, we know more than anybody else, when you go inside of countries and you're looking for a particular militant and or terrorist group, when innocent civilians begin to be harmed more so than the terrorists that you're going after, you then create more terrorists. Is this the nature of war, unfortunately? So again, if these are not going to be targeted attacks, if you're talking, you starting the occupation of Gaza once again, does the Israeli have enough history to know how the Palestinians in the Gaza region will respond? And I think they're thinking futuristically how they can stop a lot of conflict if they get on board and garner some sort of peace treaty and or ceasefire and start to broker and partner with Palestinian officials to eradicate the region of Hamas. What about work with the officials that are already in the region and state of Gaza, of Palestine and or Gaza? Granted, I've said on many accord, they're not a unified group, but by partnering with them, you can gain more intel that can have you to do more targeted attacks. And what about the rebuilding of Gaza? You want to displace a lot of the Gazans, a lot of the Palestinians out of that region to do what? I digress, because this story has been going on for quite some time now. And believe me, as more information comes out, I'll keep you guys updated right here on Black Logic. Please hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell so you're notified every time I release a video and or go live. And also hit the like button as well, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me here. Now and again, as we are looking at the situation unfold in Gaza in a move that has ignited international outcry, the U.S. State Department, as I told you, we're tied into this with Israel. We've been supporting this, has halted all visitor visas for Gaza children needing medical care. And the decision followed pressure from far-right influencer Laura Loomer, a proud Islamophobe, according to critics. And humanitarian groups are calling it a cruel blow to innocent kids. They said, no, we're not going to give any visas to children who need to come to America to get surgeries and or medical assistance. So we're not supporting innocent children who have, as you can tell in this picture, folks, unfortunately, have been dismembered. He has lost an arm as well as a leg due to this war between the IDF and the so-called Hamas terrorist group. And I mean so-called, meaning that 10 to 15,000 of them have already perished. And granted, there's still elements out there, but the attacks, unfortunately, according to the reports, have not been targeted. So now we have thousands of innocent people who have lost body parts, family members, and all other sorts of egregious things. They've lost all sorts of other egregious things. Now, I know you guys have been following this story in my hometown, Washington, D.C., because 3 Republican-led states, and of course, West Virginia, where I went to college, where they had so-called Klan members show up at that campus at one time, West Virginia Wesleyan College, that was one of the colleges I went to, South Carolina, and Ohio announced they're sending hundreds of guard troops to D.C. at Trump's request. They're reportedly armed and meant to assist with patrols and crowd control amid a political climate suddenly labeled a crime emergency. And critics point out violent crime is actually at a 30-year low in the capital. And again, I must bring it up. Why aren't you sending troops to Chicago? Why aren't you sending troops to Baltimore? Why aren't you sending troops to Nashville? Why aren't you sending troops to Memphis? Why aren't you sending troops to where 1% of biker gangs are committing crime and drug trafficking and people trafficking versus just where areas where there's large enclaves and population of Black Americans? Oh, because you guys commit the most crimes. Unfortunately, guys, I hate to burst your bubble on this. That's absolutely untrue. If you look at the DOJ and the FBI, Black Americans do not lead the nation in crime as a racial group. We do not. And if you look at it, the recent reports, even back from 5 years, again, this is not to target any group, but this is the state of fact, it's been white Americans. Some people will state, well, per capita, there's more white Americans in America than Black Americans. Well, according to the percentage, because that's what you have to go to. You can't go by simple numbers because, of course, we're outnumbered, but according to the percentages, they still outnumber us in crime. Now, when it comes to murder, then we have a debate and argument that we can discuss and how these things actually transform and how the results are then spoke about. Because some people will state that we can't trust government-led statistics, that we need to more so lean towards independent groups, and then you'll have the vice versa. But I believe, before I move any further, I do want to touch upon the situation, the reason why Russia and Ukraine have been in these constant conflicts throughout the past 30 years or so of who actually owns Crimea. This is one of the reasons why they're at war, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to touch on DC, so please stay tuned here. Now, long before modern borders, Crimea was fought over by the Greeks and the Khazars and the Kipchaks and the Mongols. Now, I'm not trying to give you the full history, but kind of give you some context, because then came centuries of the nomads, the Crimean Khanates under the Ottoman sway, and the Genoese trading dots dotting the coast. History wrote itself here in blood, salt, and the empire. Now, if we fast forward to 1783, with the Ottoman Empire weakening the Catherine the Great siege in Crimea, the annexation brought to an end to the Crimea Khanate and began a brutal era of Russianification and Tatar oppression. Now, a lot of these words I may be butchering, so please excuse me. But this wasn't just land grabbing, it was cultural erasure, a shift in identity that left scars till we felt them today. And if we fast forward to 1954, when we had the Khrushchev transfer Crimea from the Russian SFSR to the Ukrainian SSR. And why? Officially, economic integration and symbolic unity over 300 years since the agreement. But politically, some say it was a personal favor to Ukraine and a reshifting of power. So whatever the reason, legal or not, that this transfer planted Crimea's modern soil, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Crimea became part of the independent Ukraine that was recognized by Russia and Ukraine and the Budapest Memorandum. So again, I think this is President Putin's way of trying to return to the way things once were. And this is the reason why these skirmishes, these conflicts, these battles continue to occur between Ukraine and Russia. Now, here's the raw truth, folks. Crimea is Ukrainian, not because of history, but because law and ethics demand it. It's not just real estate. It's a national honor. Ukrainian's constitution declares Crimea inseparable, and giving it up would erode trust in international norms. It will signal that the land grabs work and that geopolitical bullying pays, because again, Russia agreed way before Putin that Crimea would be Ukraine's. So the Crimea story is centuries in the making, from the Byzantine cathedrals to the Tatar Khanates. And again, these are a lot of the words they've been using in Eastern Europe, folks. So again, please excuse me as I butcher some of these names. But this comes from the Tsarist conquest to the Soviet politics and Putin's 21st century aggression. Now, for Ukraine, surrender isn't an option. It's a line in the sand. So that's why you haven't really seen President Zelenskyy move a bit giving up Crimea, because once you beg for peace by giving away your land, you teach the world to take more, meaning that first is Crimea, then is Kiev, then is another piece of Ukraine, and then here we are again at the Soviet Union, where Russia would then again embark on land grabs with Belarus, Poland, and other Eastern European countries. So again, that's kind of my quick 2 cents on that situation. And if we look at it historically, then you guys will probably understand that originally, okay, if we go far back as the late 1700s, at one point in time, Crimea did belong to Russia, but Russia gave it up to Ukraine. So again, in those regards, I digress because I really want to touch on DC and how the National Guard is absolutely taking over DC. And they have already removed 3 entrapment camps of homelessness. My thing is, how do you crack down on homelessness without providing resources as shelters, okay, where these unsheltered people can then have a roof over their head and really have programs in place that can rehabilitate them so they can be working citizens of America? Because again, we're talking about American citizens here. Now, some of them have gotten their positions because of bad investments. Some of them have probably have some sort of addiction with alcohol and drugs. And I don't want to get into the addictions because again, DC is still majority Black. I think it's 43% Black. Then the next population of race is white people. I think around 36, 37%. And then you have other people from different races, ethnics, and so on that live in the nation's capital. But Black Americans are still the majority population in Washington, D.C. But if not only are we the majority population, but we're also the majority of homeless people in that area. And I don't want to get into COINTELPRO. I don't want to get into how the 3-letter and 4-letter agencies, allegedly the CIA, FBI, and other, again, infuse Black neighborhoods around the nation, even the nation's capital, with crack cocaine, with cocaine itself, and how, again, another tool in the white supremacy's tool bag to decimate, to devastate, and to delete Black people on a very, very large scale. Because then you'll have your white adjacent, you'll have your white supremacists, those who benefit from the system of white supremacy state, that, oh, you're just making excuses because people don't want to work and they strung out on drugs and this is what they want to do. See, if we look at the 2 drug epidemics in America, the crack epidemic and the opioid epidemic, the crack epidemic was a crackdown on thugs and drug dealers and gangsters and pushers. How did the drugs get into America? I digress. We already know that story. Again, I just said those 3 and 4-letter agencies. Number 2, who was pushing opioids and writing bad pharmaceutical notes? So drug dealers, drug pushers, drug promoters, okay? Because you had a lot of these drug companies had representatives that go out and promote these opioids. And the majority of the population of people who were addicted to opioids were white people. But instead of having a criminal crackdown, incarcerating the doctors, the pharmaceutical companies, as well as the people who were doing the drugs like they did crack cocaine, they used government resources to assist these people with these addictions. You see, there is a duplicitous contradiction of the 2 drug epidemics in America. I digress because I do want to go a little bit deeper on this, because if we begin with the origins of policing in America, yep, I'm going back. And then we emphasize that the first police system in the U.S. evolved from slave patrols, organized force meant to control and terrorize Black Americans in this country and not protect the citizens. This isn't a debatable footnote. It is foundational to American law enforcement, particularly in the southern states where it originally started. Now, believe it or not, Washington, D.C. is below the Mason-Dixon line, so it is considered the South, even though most people look at it as the North. And I want you guys to trace how early American policing mechanisms were rooted in safeguarding landowners and assets, not the welfare of Black or working class communities. And if we fast forward, today's aggressive policing in Black majority areas of DC reflects those origins, systems built to regulate rather than to uplift. So much for protect and serve. Protect and serve who? Who are you protecting and serving? Now, this is really not geared, okay, even though it encompasses the police and the National Guard, because again, this is by the orders of the president. And we can really highlight how media and public energy center around these certain areas and how we have Gaza and Ukraine and the solidarity marches and the viral social posts and the fundraising campaigns for these countries and how American citizens support these other countries. And I speak about these all the time. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Black residents face escalating militarization neglected by the institutions meant to serve them. We want to crack down on crime. Why is there high crime in the nation's capital? Why is there high crime in America compared to other European nations? Why? Again, the majority of the people in America, right, Europeans, they come from Europe. They're descendants of Europeans. So that's why, in some regards, America is a European nation. They're not located in Europe. I got it. But we understand the construction and the exception and how America was started. So I want you guys to really look at this. Because in this month, President Trump evoked Section 740 of the Home Rule Act to assume control of the Metropolitan Police Department, which is a historical first, and federalize them. He also deployed 800 plus and soon to be more National Guard troops that are coming from West Virginia, South Carolina, as well as Ohio. Now, as you see in one of these pictures, and I'll show this very quickly here, some of the troops are unarmed depending on where they are. This is the reflecting pool. Okay, you have the monument there that you see in the picture, and then on the opposite side, you have the Lincoln Memorial. But the streets of DC are now being militarized. And Trump framed the operation as necessary to quell crime, to stop bloodshed and bedlam and squalor. But data shows violent crime in DC is at a 30-year low. I remember when DC was the murder capital of the United States of America. Now, that was some quite times ago. I believe that was in the late 80s as well as the mid 90s. Again, that's nothing to hang your hat on. A lot of senseless crime and unaliving of a lot of people. But we're at a 30-year low, ladies and gentlemen. And we have other states and cities where higher crime, much higher crime than DC. Oh, it's the nation's capital. They should have zero crime. No country in the world has zero crime. No nation's capital, no country's capital have zero crime. But it's just way too much. And critics label this federal intervention as political motivated authoritarian overreach. Now, in alignment with this crackdown, the Interior Department adopted a no tolerance policy for homeless encampments in DC. There should be no homeless encampments in DC, which is federal land that was given to create a federal state. Land by Maryland and land by Virginia was given. That's why on a lot of accords, when you're traveling in the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia area, some areas in Maryland, you have to go through DC to get to Virginia and vice versa. Now, to provide more context on the entrapment camps, and when we're referencing a lot of the homelessness in DC, roughly 75 camps were cleared near landmarks like the Lincoln Memorial, and advocates warned that dispersal uproots individuals from crucial support networks, healthcare, family services without any valuable refuge. And many have nowhere to go. DC's shelter system is overstretched, mental health beds are scarce, and Medicaid red tape delays access for those without insurance. This is why they are in these areas, unfortunately, to beg, to ask tourists that can't come to DC for money so they can feed themselves. And some of you, again, I know you're going to say, oh, to get more drugs and more alcohol. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's what some of them are doing as well. I'm not oblivious. But nonetheless, 75 camps were removed. And again, as I stated, some states with higher crime rates remain unmilitarized, for instance, No similar federal intervention in cities in the Midwest or South, despite similar or worse statistics. Now, as commentators note, Trump's rhetoric echoes a legacy of racist condemnation of Black-led or progressive cities, framing them as disorderly to justify heavy-handed federal control. And I know what some people are going to say, oh, this is not racial. President Trump has taken pictures with P. Diddy. No, Diddy. He's taking pictures with Jay-Z, and he's talking about all these famous people. Famous people always take pictures with other famous people who are rich. Okay. And a lot of these pictures were taken at parties and events. But now we're looking at President Trump on a national scale. And the reason why I stated that it's difficult for him to do this is because other places have autonomy from the federal government in some regards, because they have senators, they have congressmen, they can go to the Supreme Court to stop any takeover of jurisdictions from President Trump. And he knows this. So again, when I look at this, when I look at the takeover of the nation's capital, and then I look at the amount of foreign aid that's given to other countries, and the contrast of how billions flow to international causes, even as DC's Black communities face housing crisis and systematic negligence. The displaced need permanent housing, mental health care, job opportunities, and community investment, not patrols and show of force tactics. See, we can rally for the world, ladies and gentlemen. And that is what we've been doing for a very long time. We've been rallying for the world. We've been speaking out against the atrocities against Ukraine and Russia. We're talking about how, the Palestinians in Gaza are being treated by Israel, and how those things need to stop. Even the citizens of Israel are now crying out. So we can rally for the world all we want. But what about here in the United States of America? We can fund war-torn nations and help them to rebuild. But what about the Black hearts and homes of people in DC? See, I believe it's time that we care just as deeply and more about who we already are. Whatever happened to America first? Maybe I need to modify it just a little bit. Maybe just a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to figure out, how would I modify America first? America first, except when it includes Black Americans.